Welcome to the Spanish OA meeting of There is a Solution, which in Spanish is Hay una solución. Our group started around a year and a half, a year before the pandemic. So we've been here for a while now, and we have meetings 24/7 every single day of the year. We have around 70 meetings a week, including special meetings such the one for anorexia, bulimia, compulsive overeaters, and children as young as 8 years old, which come to the meetings with their parents. We focus our recovery and working the 12 steps and living on steps 10, 11, and 12 as a way of life. Today is July 24. My name is Lupita and I'm your moderator. We have Spanish interpretation provided by Monica M. and Mario G. To choose the Spanish option, please choose the icon in the bottom with the world image, and that way you can choose the language that you prefer. Si necesitan la interpretación en español, se van en la parte de abajo de la pantalla y aprietan el símbolo, el icono con el símbolo de y seleccionan español. Este canal va a ser únicamente para inglés. Thank you, Mónica. Esta junta está siendo grabada, pero solamente se va a publicar el audio. Nuestro orador esta mañana es Harlan y tiene muchos... He has many years in OA and has a great message of recovery for us. This is a summer refresher of the 12-step program. Harlan is a recovery compulsive eater from Scottsdale, Arizona, and he has been in OA since 1979. Over 30 years, he has shared experience, strength, and hope to thousands of compulsive eaters. During this 3 days workshop, we will present us with the 12 steps of recovery as outlined by the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The opinions expressed here are those of the people who express them, and they do not represent OA as a whole. The 12 steps don't have representatives nor celebrities, but we do have people with a lot of recovery and great deal of knowledge and experience in the program. Harlan is one of these people. There will be a period of questions at the end of the talk. For the questions in Spanish, you can write them in the chat. We translate them for you. For questions in English, raise your hand in the electronic hand. And with no further delay, I introduce you to our speaker, Harlan. Welcome, Harlan.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Lupita. Thank you very much. I'm very, very happy to be here. And I'm very happy to be participating in this. It's quite an honor. Yesterday evening, we went through the doctor's opinion. And in the doctor's opinion, we find out that our disease is twofold.
Harlan, I think you're muted. I cannot hear you.
Oh, doesn't look like
you were okay.
You were okay. We can hear you.
Okay. We went through the doctor's opinion, and in the doctor's opinion, which is step 1, and Bill's story is step 1, and we're going to get the history of step 2 this morning too. In the doctor's opinion, we find out that the disease is a twofold disease. It's a twofold illness. It is an illness of the body, which is what Dr. Silkworth calls the allergy of the body. And what does that mean, the allergy of the body? That means that we are allergic to certain foods. And when we say allergic, what we mean by that is it sets us up with an abnormal adverse reaction to those foods. In a normal person's body, when they eat food, whether it's candy, whether it's pizza, whether it's whatever that may be, they get all the food they want. And the more food they eat, the less food they want. In my body, fried food, for me, I'm not talking about for you, for me, sugar, white flour, anything fried, certain spices, certain fats, certain ingredients when mixed together, fat, sugar, flour, anything like that is going to set me up with an actual physical craving for more of the same. And this physical allergy explains a lot of things for which I have no other explanation. I cannot account. It explains why when I eat a little ice cream, I eat a whole gallon. When I eat a gallon of ice cream, I'm also on to other things, pizza, whatever that may be, French fries, what have you. And in a normal person, that does not occur. The other thing that happens in the doctor's opinion is we understand why we take the first mouthful of food. Why do I do this to myself when everything in my life screams, don't do this, don't do this. I want to be thin, but there I am eating. Well, why do I take the first mouthful of food? Because of an insatiable desire to get what Dr. Silkworth calls the effect. What is that effect? That's the mental part of it. The mental twist is the part of my mind that zeroes in on the sense of ease and comfort that comes instantly by eating certain foods. And I eat those foods in search of relief to the unbelievable pain of not eating. And that all human beings have emotions. All human beings have happiness, jealousy, anger, fear. All human beings have these emotions, boredom, whatever that may be. And in most people, they can dissipate these emotions very easily. You see them all the time. They go drive out a bucket of balls, golf balls. They'll go shoot baskets. They'll go to the gym. They'll take a walk. They'll play with the dog. They'll read a book, and they'll take a bath. They're fine. Everything is fine. They don't find it necessary to eat food to solve their problem. In my mind, these emotions are so toxic that when they're allowed to build to a certain level, my brain knows that by eating certain foods, it will change my perception of reality. It will change the way I feel instantly. And my brain, the mental twist and the mental blank spot. What is the mental blank spot? It's that part of my brain that's the built-in forgetter. And I cannot remember what the food does to me. I can only remember what the food does for me. I can only remember the benefit of eating that food. And I eat it in search of relief to the pain. And then I set up the allergy. And so if I can't eat because of this allergy, and I can't keep from eating because of this twist of the mind, then I am powerless over food and my life is unmanageable. And that's the first step in Overeaters Anonymous, is a recognition that I cannot eat because of the allergy and I cannot keep from eating because of the twist of the mind. If I can't eat and can't not eat, then only a spiritual awakening will help me. I never had a spiritual experience. We're going to read the story this morning of a man who did. His name is Bill Wilson. And as we study the life of Bill, we are going to study the life of a man who is afflicted with this mental twist, mental blank spot, and the physical allergy. And the reason that Bill's story is page 1 of the book, it didn't used to be, the doctor's opinion used to be in the the Arabic numerals. The doctor's opinion was moved after the first printing because the book is supposed to be for alcoholics by alcoholics. Very important. But we're going to study the life today of Bill Wilson. And the reason that Bill's story is at the very first chapter is because it's going to let us identify in. Do I think the way Bill thinks? Do I eat the way Bill drinks? Do I react the way Bill reacts? And if I do, I'm probably in the right place. And if I don't, I might not be a compulsive overeater. But since I've been through this a million times, I know very well that I relate right down the line. Bill Wilson was born on the 26th of November, 1895. He was born in a place called East Dorset, Vermont. East Dorset, Vermont is a very small town in Vermont, and it is right across from a place called Manchester, Vermont. Manchester, Vermont is a place where wealthy people have summer homes. It's more of a resort town. And there were people there that had summer homes that Bill will bump up against during his childhood that are going to change the course of human history forever. And Bill was the son and the grandson that we know of alcoholics. Bill's father, Gilman Wilson, he was an alcoholic, and his alcoholism was ripping his marriage apart. And his grandfather on the Wilson side was also an alcoholic. And Bill had been warned many times as a child not to imbibe in liquor, not to drink liquor. And Bill's mother was Emily. Emily was his mother, and Gilman was his father. And in 1906, when Bill was 10 years old, not quite 11 years old, Bill's parents got a divorce. And in 1906, divorce was very scandalous, very rare. There was a stigma to it. I was born in 1954, and I can remember very, very well that when there were very few divorces when I was a kid. It was a very rare kind of thing. And in the grammar school that I went to, there was just a couple of parents that were divorced. And when the ladies would come to functions at the school or whatever that were divorced, the wives would really be very worried that they were going to steal their husbands or something. You know, it was very, very taboo in those days. Now it's very commonplace, unfortunately. I am also divorced, which I didn't want, but it happened. So I am divorced now. So, you know, I'm one of those people. But the bottom line is that in 1906, they got a divorce, and Bill's father went out west to Canada to work in the lumber mills and in the granite and marble mines that are out there. And Vermont is also very rich in granite. It's very rich in limestone. It's very rich in lumber. As a matter of fact, the cornerstones on many of the buildings in Washington, D.C. are laid with Vermont granite, Vermont stone. And Bill's mother, she went off to Boston, Massachusetts, and she later became one of the nation's first female osteopathic physicians. And Bill and Dorothy was Bill's younger sister, and she will play into the history too, because later on in her life, she's going to marry a guy by the name of Dr. Leonard Strong, and he will figure prominently in the history, in the story of Bill Wilson. But Dorothy and Bill went to live in East Dorset, Vermont with Grandma and Grandpa Griffith. The G in Bill's name, William G. Wilson, stands for Griffith. This is his maternal grandparents who raised him from the time he was 10 until he became an adult. Grandma and Grandpa Griffith lived just a couple of blocks from where Bill's parents lived, so it wasn't a big geographical transition for him, but it was a big transition in the fact that now he was living with his grandparents rather than his parents. Bill was a shy child, but he was a very hard worker, very smart. He passed the Edison test as a child. And the Edison test was given by Thomas Alva Edison to boys, and he wanted to test their proficiency in math and science. And Bill went and took the Edison test and passed it, but he never apprenticed with Edison. He always said that he knew that Edison would always be the top man, and he didn't want to work in an organization where he couldn't be the top man. Bill was a very, very hard worker, always shy, always apprehensive, but always a hard worker. He found a violin up in the attic where Grandma and Grandpa Griffin lived, and he became proficient on the violin, and he became co-first chair of his school's orchestra. When he went to Burren Burton Academy in Manchester, he became co-first chair, and he played the violin right up till the time that he passed away. As a matter of fact, if you go to Stepping Stones in New York, Bedford Hills, New York, to visit, you can see his violin there, and you can see Lois's piano, and they often played together. He found a baseball glove up there, and he practiced tirelessly, and he became the co-captain and the starting shortstop of his school's baseball team. He read in a book that only an Aborigine could fashion a boomerang that would actually come back to you. And he worked tirelessly at fashioning a boomerang. And then one day in the backyard with Grandpa Griffith tending to his garden, and the boomerang almost hit him, Bill actually got the boomerang to come back to him. And if you visit the Wilson home in East Dorset, where Bill was born, you can see where he cut away the headboard of his bed, and that's how he made the boomerang, was from wood that he got from the headboard of his bed. And you can actually see the boomerang. Of course, they come up with you and watch you, so you don't take any souvenirs home with you. So you want to leave that stuff there for future generations to witness. Bill had anxiety as a child, and he was treated by psychiatrists, psychologists for anxiety all of his adult life. Bill also suffered from depression. He was clinically depressed. And Bill's depression was brought on at first when he was a teenager. He was in love with a girl named Bertha Bamford, and Bertha Bamford was the love of Bill's life. And Bertha went to New York for what was described to Bill as a very routine surgery, very routine. And she died. And when Bill got wind of her death, he fell into the first of his many, many depressions. And as I say, he will suffer from depression his entire adult life. So this is a little bit of a background on who Bill Wilson was. Let's go to page 1. I don't care what edition you have unless it's a first edition, first printing. And if you have one of those, you've got something pretty valuable there. Page 1, 4th edition. War fever ran high in the New England town to which we knew young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned. Plattsburgh is a city in upstate New York. It's a small town actually in upstate New York. And we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. Here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of life at last, and in the midst of the excitement, I discovered liquor. So here he was drinking what they called cordials. I'm not a drinker. I am not a drinker by anyone's standards. If I've had 20 alcoholic beverages in my life, that would be stretching it. I really don't know a lot about liquor, but it was called a cordial. I don't know what's in them or what they are. That's what they were drinking, was cordials. I forgot the strong warnings and the prejudice of my people concerning drink. In time, we sailed for over there. Over there denotes World War I. Sometimes in meetings, people will say how Bill was in World War II. Not true. He was in World War I. Remember, World War II broke out when Bill was 40 years old, so he would not have been taken as a soldier. He was in World War I. I was very lonely, and again turned to alcohol. Let's take a look at what we just read. It does not say I was very thirsty and turned to alcohol. It does not say I was very in need of a drink, so I turned to alcohol. It says I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. In other words, the buildup of human emotion, the loneliness. And what did Bill know without knowing it yet? That the effect of the liquor would change his perception of reality to the point where the loneliness would go away. Can I relate to the way Bill drinks? Do I think the way Bill thinks? You bet that I do. And how much eating did I do because I was lonely? How much eating did I do because of these things? All of it. It's just an unbelievable phenomenon. I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. Much moved, I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel on an old tombstone. Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier is ne'er forgot, whether he dieth by musket or by pot. And what does that mean? What does that all mean? A lot of people think it has something to do with weed, with marijuana. It has nothing to do with that. What he's looking at here is he is looking at the grave of a man named Fetcher, who died in the 1600s from drinking too much beer. Pot was the way they drank beer in England at that time. There was quart pots and pint pots, and it was considered very bad manners to sit and drink. When you drank, you stood upright, and there was a bar in the saloon, and the bar is where a bar gets its name. The bar was something that the boys would lean against, and that's why, as an homage to those days, bar stools are raised above the level of a living room chair, a kitchen chair, a dining room chair. A bar stool is above that level as an homage to the days when it was considered very bad manners to sit and drink. So Bill is looking at this grave. He's looking at this tombstone. And oh, by the way, just to finish, give you a little insight here. We'll give you a little Yiddish, we'll give you a little etymology, a little history. It's a full service retreat we're doing here. But the barkeeper, when the guys would get a little rowdy, he would say, or she would say, hey, watch your pints and quarts over there. And in the late 1600s, early 1700s, when that expression made it over to the colonies, it was watch your P's and Q's. And that's how that came into our language today, of watch your P's and Q's. But Bill is looking at the grave of a man who died from drinking too much beer. And this has an effect on Bill, and he's going to refer back to this a couple of times in his story. Let's continue. Ominous warning, which I failed to heed. 22 and a veteran of foreign wars, I went home at last. I fancied myself a leader, for had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation, my talent for leadership, I imagine, would place me at the head of vast enterprises, which I would manage with the utmost assurance. Now, the disease has two traits, two characteristics. The first one being the physical allergy that we've talked about. The second one being the twist of the mind that we've talked about. But the disease has three characteristics. And the three characteristics that it has are going to be beautifully examined in Bill's story. The disease is permanent. Once you're an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. The disease is progressive. What does that mean, the disease is progressive? That means that over time, this disease gets worse and worse and worse, whether we're eating or not. Just by the fact that we're getting up in the morning, the disease is getting worse, and the disease is fatal. It will kill you. The disease is permanent. The disease is progressive. The disease is fatal. So I want you to take note of how Bill has a pretty positive attitude at this point about his future. He is absolutely sure he is going to manage with the utmost assurance and be the head of a vast enterprise. Make note of that because we're going to refer back to it. Okay, go to page 2, the top. I took a night law course and obtained employment as investigator for a surety company. The drive for success was on. I proved to the world I was important. My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little, I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Let's stop right there for just a second. We see now that the disease of alcoholism is taking hold of Bill Wilson's life and is beginning to dictate where he can go and what he can do and who he can be. And this happened to me at a very, very early age. When I was a kindergartner, a first grader, I had a very clear recognition that not only I was the fattest kid in the room, but I was also the kid that couldn't wait for lunch. I couldn't wait for snack. I couldn't wait for these things. And it seemed to me that the other kids couldn't care less. And it bothered me that I was so different physically. And it bothered me that I was so different mentally. It bothered me, but there was nothing I could do about it. I have eaten railroad cars full of potato chips to kill the guilt and kill the shame of eating railroad cars full of potato chips. Every dream that I dreamed was altered and dashed and vandalized and putrefied by this disease. I never intended to do what I do for a living. I consider it disgusting. But the bottom line is I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be somebody that was respectable. I wanted to do what everyone else was doing, but I couldn't because I was so morbidly obese. Now, Bill will pass his law degree. He will become an attorney, but he will never practice law. Not so much because of his disease, maybe, but he really was more enchanted with Wall Street. Let's see where we go from there. Though my drinking was not yet continuous, it disturbed my wife. Lois Burnham Wilson was his wife. We had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that men of genius conceive their best projects when drunk, that the most majestic constructions of philosophic thought were so derived. He's lying to Lois. He's getting drunk. And Bill is getting nagged by Lois constantly about how much he's drinking and how often he's drunk. And he tells her that most men of genius have their best ideas when they're drunk. He's lying. What is the first victim of compulsive behavior? The truth. The first thing to go out the window when an addiction is practiced is honesty. Nothing falls before honesty. I can't put that food in my mouth. I can't lie to you. I can't lie about things that I need to lie about until I've lied to myself. So the very first victim of compulsive behavior, alcoholism, compulsive overeating, anorexia, bulimia, the very first thing to go out the window is honesty. That's the first victim. Page 2, middle of the page. By the time I completed the course, I knew the law was not for me. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that one day would turn in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. Living modestly, my wife and I saved $1,000. Now, I want you to remember something. That's a lot of money in those days. Now, to us today, $1,000, I hope it's not a lot of money to you. I hope to God that it's not, a fortune of money to you. But in those days, $1,000, just to put it in perspective, could have bought you 2 new cars. The Ford Model A sold for $495 brand new. So you could have got 2 brand new cars and got $10 change. A house, not a schlock house, not a schlocky kind of house, a decent house in Chicago at that time. Now remember, this is the early 1920s. This is the late teens, early 20s. You could get a house in Chicago for about $1,500, maybe $2,000 at the most, but you could get a really nice house for about $1,500. And he and his wife saved $1,000. The average salary at that time, remember I told you that in 1929, which is later on than this, Dr. Silkworth went to work at the town's hospital. He was a doctor, and they were paying him $35 a week. If you were making 10, 15 bucks a week in those days, you were doing okay. You weren't getting rich, but you were doing okay. At 15 bucks a week, you could live a decent middle-class life. It went into certain securities, then cheap and rather unpopular. I rightly imagined that they would someday have a great rise. I failed to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and management, but my wife and I decided to go anyway. I had developed a theory that most people lost money in stocks through ignorance of markets. I discovered many more reasons later on. Bill is looking at the 1920s, and he's on Wall Street, and he sees that these guys are making money hand over fist. It's one of the greatest boom times in the history of our country is the post-World War I boom of the 1920s. They were called the Roaring 20s because things were going crazy. And he says, look, we need more information on these companies. And they poo-pooed it. They said, oh, we don't need that. That's crazy. Just shut up and make your money and go home and put it in the bank. And he says, no, we need information. So Bill was cunning, baffling, and powerful too. And he decides that they're going to go find out about these companies. Now, the only reason that Lois agreed to do this is she extracted a promise from him that if she did this, what would happen? He wouldn't get drunk. He wouldn't drink. And of course, he can't stick to that promise. Where did he meet with some of these guys? He would find the nearest bar to these companies and wait there for the guys to get off work. And he got drunk with these guys, and he would leave Lois in a tent in the forest by herself many, many times. And she made him promise every time not to get drunk. She was a good little Al-Anon, and in 1950, her and Ann Bingham will form a group called Al-Anon Family Groups. And remember that I told you that Bill Wilson knew people on the Manchester, Vermont side, and one of the families that had a home there were the Burnhams, and Lois Burnham was their daughter, and that's how he met Lois, was in Manchester, and that's how he met her in that area. We gave up our positions, bottom of 2, and off we roared on a motorcycle, the sidecar stuff with tent, blankets, a change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of a financial reference service, top of 3. Our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed. Perhaps they were right. I had had some success at speculation, so we had a little money, but we once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our small capital. That was the last honest manual labor on my part for many a day. We covered the whole eastern United States in a year. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there, and the use of a large expense account, the exercise of an option, brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s for that year. He's making surgeon money now. He's making very good money. They're moving to Park Avenue. He's starting to become one of the princes of Wall Street. People are starting to seek out his opinion. He is on the rise. His career, his life is on the ascendancy. But let's see where he goes from there. For the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. Here's the kid from East Dorset, Vermont, the kid that didn't have a pot to pee in or a window to throw it out of. He's in New York. He's in the Big Apple. He's buying Lois dresses and fur coats. He buys her a piano that she's always wanted. He's riding high. He's living on Park Avenue. He's eating with the right people, drinking with the right people. He's going good. He has arrived. Let's see where we go. My judgment and ideas were followed by many to the tune of paper millions. Could you just imagine that based on your opinion, people are investing large amounts of money because your opinion is telling them to do so, and they respect your opinion so much that they are investing all kinds of money based on your opinion. Could you imagine what that would do for your ego? My God, I can't even imagine. The great boom of the late 20s was seething and swelling. Drink was taking an important and exhilarating part in my life. There was loud talk in the jazz places uptown. Everyone spent in thousands and chattered in millions. Scoffers could scoff and be damned. I made a host of fair weather friends. Now he's riding high. His drinking is working for him. Everything seems to be coming together. Can I relate to Bill? I've had times when things went well for me. You've had times when things went better for you. You've had times when things went your way for a while, but what did we establish about the three characteristics of the disease? It is permanent, it is progressive, it is fatal. So he has been riding high. He's got a high opinion of himself. Things are good. Let's see where he goes from there quickly because of the progressive nature of this disease. My drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night. Take note of the word almost every night because we're going to refer back to that in the progressive description. The remonstrances of my friends. What is a remonstrance? A remonstrance is a protestation. What does that mean? It means his friends are starting to get on him now, that he is responsible to them for the investing of their money, for their college funds, for their children, for their whatever. And every time they seem to call upon him, he's drunk. And the remonstrances means that his friends are starting to protest. Of my friends terminated in a row, not a row, a row. What is a row? A row is a quarrel. So his friends are starting to quarrel with him about his drinking, and I became a lone wolf. Now, wait a minute there. The progressive nature of his disease is forcing him into a corner. He is now going to have to make a choice between liquor and his friends, between liquor and the prestige that he has enjoyed as a person of respect. And what does he choose? He chooses liquor. He becomes a lone wolf. Can I relate to Bill Wilson? You bet that I can. There were many, many Friday nights when my friends would be at a bar trying to pick up girls, and they wanted me to come with them, and I wouldn't do it. And my food was getting awful salty. And they were at bars and picking up women and kissing them and doing the things guys do with girls. And I'd be home and the tears would be running down my face because I knew that I was better than this. I was better than this. I should be with them doing the things I've always wanted to do, but I decided I couldn't do them till I was thin. And to get thin, I figured I'd eat some Doritos and I'd eat some Chunky bars and I'd eat some Oreo cookies and I'd eat a gallon of ice cream. That's not how a person gets thin. And my food was getting real salty because as I would eat the food, I would be saying to myself, stop, stop, don't do this, don't do it. Everything that's holy, don't do this. But as that allergy would surge through me, I couldn't stop. And I'd start crying because I knew I was killing myself. I knew that I looked like crap. I knew that I was 300, 400, 500 pounds, whatever I was at the time. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to pick up a girl at that weight. I was emasculated physically by this disease. I was emasculated emotionally by this disease. I went on my first date with a girl. I was 35 years old. If I had known that, I would have taken my own life. Thank God I didn't know it. This disease will suck the life right out of you. It will take from you every semblance of who you are and what you could be and should be. And it will dehumanize you and marginalize you to one extent or another. It will make you inhuman because you can't dream, because you can't aspire, and because you can't be happy. There were moments of pleasure from food, from events, from things, moments of pleasure. But there was no happiness in my life in the food. There's a huge difference between pleasure and happiness. And the only happiness I've ever known was through this program because of a spiritual awakening as the result of the steps. Can I relate to the way Bill thinks? You bet I can. Can I relate to the way Bill drinks? You bet I can. Do I see the progression of the disease, that it's getting worse and worse and worse? Can I relate to that? You bet that I can. Let's continue. If you can too, you're in the right place. There had been no real infidelity for loyalty to, there were many unhappy scenes in our sumptuous apartment. There had been no real infidelity for loyalty to my wife, helped at times by extreme drunkenness, kept me out of those scrapes. Now, I love Bill Wilson. He's my hero. I read everything he wrote, but I will tell you that this part is something that is a little different than what Lois describes, but we'll just leave it go at that. In 1929, I contracted golf fever. We went at once to the country, my wife to applaud, while I started out to overtake Walter Hagen. Now, let's dig into that just a little bit. They weren't just going to the country. And we say the country, the Burnhams had a home in Manchester, Vermont. And when he would drink in New York, they would go to Vermont. When he would drink in Vermont, they would go to New York. They were trying geographic cures. Now, liquor caught up with me much faster than I came up behind Walter. I began to be jittery in the morning, progression of the disease. I started vomiting every morning. I'm not bulimic, but when you shove that much food into your mouth, you start vomiting in the morning. At least I did. Golf permitted drinking every day and every night. Remember, I told you to make note of the almost every night drinking he was doing? Now he's drinking every day and every night. progression. Can I relate to the progression of the disease? You bet that I can. It was fun to roam around the exclusive course, which had inspired such awe in me as a lad. I acquired the impeccable coat of tan one sees upon the well-to-do. The local banker watched me whirl fat checks in and out of his till with amused skepticism. He's doing okay. He's making some money on Wall Street, but something's just not right. Something's just not there. Abruptly in October 1929, hell broke loose on the New York Stock Exchange. This would be Black Tuesday, 1929, October the 29th, 1929, the beginning of the Great Depression. And when the United States of America gets a cold, the rest of the world gets pneumonia. And the stock market plunged as it has never plunged before or since. Things were in panic. Just to put it in perspective for you, number of years ago, around 2006, 2007, we had 15% unemployment, and the country was up in arms. At this time, overnight, you will get unemployment among blacks, 95 to 100% unemployment. Among Hispanics, among Pacific, among Oriental, you will get unemployment of 95 to 100%. Among whites, unemployment will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60%. There is no money. There is no credit. Nothing is going to happen in business. But this is the first day of the Depression. Let's go back and let's see what goes on. Hell broke loose on the New York Stock Exchange. After one of those days of inferno, I wobbled from a hotel bar to a brokerage office. It was 8 o'clock, 5 hours after the market closed. The ticker still clattered. I was staring at an inch of tape which bore the inscription XYZ32. It had been 52 that morning. I was finished, and so were many friends. The papers reported men jumping to death from the towers of high finance. That disgusted me. I would not jump. I went back to the bar. Make note of how disgusted he is at the people that are killing themselves, because that's going to play into our story here in just a little bit. Now, what happened? It says high finance in capital letters, capitalized. Why did he do that? Because to a lot of people, that was their higher power. That was their God. That disgusted me. I would not jump. I went back to the bar. So everything around him is crashing. Everything around him is disastrous. People are killing themselves. He goes to the bar without knowing why, without knowing any of this. What did he know without knowing it? He knew that the liquor would make him feel better. I knew that some Kentucky Fried Chicken, some pizza, some French fries, that's just what I needed. I didn't know about the disease. I didn't know all the things that we've talked about, but there was an inherent knowledge in my head that said, eat some Twinkies, eat some Hostess Suzy Q's. You'll feel better. Get some chocolate milk. Get some ice cream. Get a thing of Oreo cookies. Smash them up into a gallon of ice cream. You're going to feel like $1 million. And thousands of times, that's what I did. Can I relate to the way he thinks? Yes. Can I relate to the way he drinks? Yes. Can I relate to the progressive nature of his disease? Yes. Okay, let's continue. Maybe you can too. Maybe this is the first time you've looked at this story in that way. I went back to the bar. My friends had dropped several million since 10 o'clock. So what? Tomorrow was another day. He's got that whiskey inside of him. Everything's going to be okay. You give me enough candy and everything's going to be okay. My girlfriend dumps me. My wife divorces me. Business is crap. Give me some M&Ms and I'll be fine. And if you're going to give me M&Ms, at least give me the ones with the peanuts. Don't give me these are obviously not Jewish people that are buying the M&Ms without peanuts. At least give me the ones with the peanuts, please, because let's be civilized. Okay, fine. As I drank, tomorrow was another day. As I drank, the old fierce determination to win came back. As I drank, the old fierce determination to win came back. What do they call it, guys? Liquid courage. They call it liquid courage. And in my case, the only liquid was a milkshake or a chocolate milk or whatever, but the courage came from the sugar, the fat, the flour, the fried food. It came from the donuts. It came from the pizza. Give me enough pizza and I can be like a cockroach. I'll survive a nuclear holocaust and I'll be just fine. Just give me enough pizza, give me enough donuts, and I'm good to go. I'm good to go. Can I relate to Bill? You bet I can. Let's continue. Next morning, I telephoned a friend in Montreal. This was his friend, Dick Johnson, Richard Johnson. He had plenty of money left and thought I had better go to Canada. By the following spring, we were living in our accustomed style. So by the following spring, he's doing fine. He's bouncing up a little bit. I felt like Napoleon returning from Elba. No St. Helena for me. Elba was an island that Napoleon was banished to. And he regroups, he gets his troops back, he reconquers his territory. But when he gets banished to St. Helena, that's the end of him. Actually, my friends just went to St. Helena 2 summers ago on their honeymoon. One of my friends got remarried, and they thought it was the most glorious vacation ever. They went to St. Helena off the coast of France. But drinking caught up with me again, and my generous friend had to let me go. This time, we stayed broke. Things are not going well. They're sinking. He's in quicksand. He doesn't know how to get out of it. Now, I want to give you a little background, a little history before we read the next paragraph. When Bill was drinking, it began again in 1917 when he was a soldier. He was 16 years old in 1917 till the end of the year. His birthday is in November. He goes into the army and he starts drinking in 1917. He comes home from the war in 1919. He gets married before he goes off to war. And Lois Burnham was the daughter of Dr. Burnham. Dr. Clark Burnham was a gynecologist, a surgeon, and he was also a genetics doctor. And in the early 1920s, Lois suffered 2 ectopic pregnancies. And an ectopic pregnancy is very dangerous because what can happen is you can actually get a hemorrhage that will cause you to bleed out. In the second of these ectopic pregnancies, Lois and Bill will never have children. But in the second of the ectopic pregnancies, Lois is bleeding so profusely that she calls her father. And this is in the days when doctors came to your house. House calls. Many of you are too young to remember that. When I was sick as a little boy, sometimes you would go to the doctor and sometimes the doctor would come to you. They stopped that in the 60s, late 60s. That was from that point on, you went to the doctor and that was it. And that no ifs, ands, or buts. Anyway, Lois calls her father and her father comes over. It's late afternoon, about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And he looks at Lois and he says, "We've got to get you to the hospital, sweetie." They take her to the hospital. Before they leave the house for the hospital, they leave a note on the kitchen table. "Bill, we have taken Lois to the hospital. Please join us there as soon as you get this note." This is 5 o'clock. 9 a.m. the next day, in comes Bill Wilson to the hospital. He stinks to high hell. It's obvious that he has not only peed in his pants, he has vomited all over himself a couple of times. He smells like a brewery. He hasn't shaved. He hasn't brushed his teeth. He looks and smells like a bum. Now, Dr. Burnham didn't like Bill Wilson to begin with. He thought Bill was a sassy, full of himself putz. He never liked Bill. Bill was not his kind of guy. And Bill was younger than Lois. Lois is about 4 years older than Bill. And he really believed that his daughter could have done a lot better than Bill Wilson. This kid from the other side of the tracks in East Dorset was better left alone by his daughter. He never liked Bill. Now he likes him a lot less. And he comes over because there's an instruction that the nurses had not to let anyone in Lois's room until Dr. Burnham talks to them first. And Dr. Burnham comes out, and there's Bill Wilson. And he says to him, "You are a bum. You are a bum. Where were you all night long? Where the hell were you? I know where you were. You were drunk." Ever get caught eating? Ever get caught puking? You remember how embarrassed you were? You remember how embarrassed you were when somebody saw you eating something that you knew was not appropriate for you to be eating, and you knew that you had been caught? This was 10 times worse than that for Bill Wilson, because now his wife is dying, and she had to have a hysterectomy that night before. And they will never have children. And she needed her husband to be with her. She wanted her husband to be with her, and he was nowhere to be found. Nowhere was he to be found. That hysterectomy was very tough on Lois. She was young. She was strong. She had dreams of having a family with Bill, children. All those dreams were now kaput. Now he's moving in with them at 182 Clinton in Brooklyn. I've been there. Now he's moving in with them. Let's go to the bottom, page 4. I feel it's better when I give you a little bit of the background. I hope you enjoy it too. We went to live with my wife's parents. Now, luckily, there was a mother-in-law apartment in their dwelling. And they had their own living space, but they still ran into the Burnhams all the time. Lois's mother was not crazy about Bill either. I found a job, then lost it as the result of a brawl with a taxi driver. What happened is Bill was drinking in Manhattan, and he has the guy, he's drunk. He has the guy bring him home to Brooklyn. Now, 182 Clinton is right across the river from Manhattan. It's not that far. It's just over the bridge, and there you are. And you walk a block or two from where the Wilsons lived, you can see Manhattan. But anyway, he couldn't pay his fare. So he's going to go into the house, and everybody's sleeping. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. Nobody's up. And the guy says, he comes out and he's talking to the cab driver. And the cab driver says, "Hey, you son of a bitch, I got a family too. You need to pay your fare." And he starts a fist fight with Bill Wilson. That's the brawl. And he loses the job that he was supposed to get over this. Okay. Mercifully, no one could guess that I was to have no real employment for 5 years or hardly draw a sober breath. My wife began to work in a department store, coming home exhausted to find me drunk. Now, let's remember that in the 1920s, it was considered disgraceful if you had to have your wife go out and work. It was not the egalitarian world that we live in today. Lois was working at Macy's department store. She was an interior decorator. She made about $19 a week salary, plus commission brought it up to about $25, $26 per week. She's working, he's not. He's laying around the house, drinking all day long. Their domestic life was in a shambles. Top of 5, I became an unwelcome hanger-on at brokerage places. He used to be very welcome. Now he's unwelcome. The progression of the disease. Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. I've done big book retreats like I'm doing for you on Zoom. I've done them all over the world. I could do a retreat Friday night, Saturday all day, and Sunday just on that sentence alone. Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. Do you see the progression? Bathtub gin. What's bathtub gin? Bathtub gin is gin you make yourself in the bathtub. This was in the days of prohibition. You couldn't go to the store and get liquor. You either had to get it from the bootlegger, or you had to get it from someone, or you had to make it yourself. 2 bottles a day. 2 bottles of gin a day. He's drinking enough now to stun a hippopotamus. If I drank 2 bottles of gin, I would probably not be able to move until a week from next Thursday. And often 3 got to be routine. 2 and 3 bottles of gin a day. He is drinking more and more and more as the disease progresses. Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I would pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early in the morning, shaking violently. He's got delirium tremens. A tumbler full of gin followed by half a dozen bottles of beer would be required, not wanted, not desired, required. This is before breakfast. He's drinking a tumbler full of gin and 6 beers before breakfast. This is before everything gets started in the day. You can see the progression. You can see the downhill progression. Would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. Nevertheless, I thought I could control the situation, and there were periods of hope, periods of sobriety, which renewed my wife's hope. What does he do on those periods of sobriety? He's going on what we would call a diet. He's controlling his drinking with sheer willpower. He has a certain sense that he's drinking too much. He has a certain sense that he's not being any too smart. Lois is on him constantly. He's embarrassed to see the Burnhams, so he tries to diet. He says to Lois, I'll never drink again. And there were periods of sobriety. Can I relate to him by temporarily dieting? You bet that I can. And it renewed Lois's hope. Lois didn't know the nature of alcoholism. She figures if he says he's not going to drink anymore and he goes a day without drinking, that's good enough for me. Happy days are here again. Yay, everything's great. Gradually, what happened? Things got worse. Never better. Progression. The house was taken over by the mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died. My wife and father-in-law became ill. Things are going downhill. Drinking more, not working, not able to function. Then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at a low point of 1932, and I had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. Then I went on a prodigious bender, and that chance vanished. This is a story within the story. It takes place in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, a place I have done a retreat. I did one in Mount Laurel, and they took me to dinner in Cherry Hill. That was Kim G's group out there that I went out there to talk to. But anyway, these guys formed a group to buy some stocks because stocks were at a low point, and they sought out Bill Wilson. They wanted his opinion. They wanted him to put everything together. And they said to him, but if you're going to get drunk, we don't want to deal with you. And this is when he was on one of his diets. And Bill doesn't understand the nature of alcoholism. He doesn't know. He figures that because he wants to be sober and because he is sober at that moment, he'll always be sober. And how many of us have been fooled by ourselves in that way? Probably all of us. And a guy passes, they meet in a hotel room in Cherry Hill. and a guy passes around a jug of whiskey. This is in the days of Prohibition, and Bill doesn't take any. Goes around again, and the guy says, "Hey, Wilson, I made this myself. It's my specialty. It's called Jersey Lightning. I bet you've never had any whiskey like mine. Certainly you can have one drink." Bill doesn't know the nature of alcoholism. Bill understands that he's not feeling quite right because he's not drinking. So he figures he'll have one drink. And what caused Bill to take the first drink? The mental twist. What caused Bill to be so drunk that they couldn't get him out of that hotel room for 3 days? The physical allergy. Once the physical allergy took over, because the liquor was inside of him, it placed him in a position where he could not control the amount he drank, and he didn't leave that hotel room for 3 days, and they decided, of course, not to work with him. Now he's got to tell Lois that the chance had vanished. Now he's got to tell himself that it was them that screwed up, not him, that it was them that did all this. But he knows in his heart that it was him and his drinking. Can I relate to Bill Wilson? You bet I can. Do I understand the way he thinks? Do I relate to the way he drinks? You bet that I do. I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did. Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. So there had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. He doesn't understand what the hell is happening to him. He doesn't get it. He doesn't understand what is happening. He wants to be sober. I wanted to be thinner. I wanted to lose weight. I didn't want to be a fat slob. I didn't want to be the fattest kid in the school. I didn't want to be the fattest kid in the neighborhood. I didn't want to be the fattest person wherever I went. I didn't want to look like a slob. I wanted to look like the other guys. I wanted to wear clothes like them. I wanted to have the girls flip their hair and giggle when I was around. And that never happened. I couldn't get out of my own way. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way and I had taken it. Was I crazy? I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. Renewing my resolve, going back on my diet, I tried again. Top of 6, sometime passed, and confidence began to be replaced by cocksuredness. I could laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. So he's sober now on sheer willpower. One day I walked into a cafe to telephone. Notice that he goes into the cafe to telephone. They didn't have a phone at the drugstore. They didn't have a phone at the clothing store. They didn't have a phone at the gas station. They didn't have a phone at the barber shop. I think they did. But he goes into a cafe because he knows he's going to drink and he's going to blame it on meeting somebody. He's got his lie cooking up for Lois, but he's got to have a drink because he can't stand not drinking because the buildup of emotions is too much for him. Can I relate? You bet I can. In no time, I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it happened. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time. But I might as well get good and drunk then. And I did. What caused Bill to take the first drink? The mental twist. What caused Bill to take the 9th drink and the 10th drink and the 30th drink? The physical allergy. The remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably. And there was a terrible sense of impending calamity, and I had that too. I hardly dared cross the street lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. Remember when he was drinking 6 bottles of ale? Now he's drinking 12 bottles of ale. Do you see the progression? Can you relate to it? Yes, I can. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. A morning paper told me the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? No, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that. So 2 bottles and oblivion. He's already had a dozen glasses of ale. Now he's drinking 2 bottles of gin and oblivion. Now he's thinking about killing himself. Remember when I asked you to make note of when he was making fun of the people, looking down his nose at the people that were killing himself? Now he's considering it. Remember when he came out of World War I, how sure he was that he would manage vast enterprises with the utmost assurance? Remember that Bill Wilson that had all those dreams? Remember that Bill Wilson that had all those dreams of success, and he believed in himself? Now he wants to kill himself. What happened? The progression of the disease, the progression of the illness. This disease is permanent, progressive, and fatal. And this is how it kills. It makes you so hopeless that you close yourself off to God, that you close yourself off to the possibility of recovery. And you don't sponsor, and you don't do the work, and you don't do the steps, and you don't have a sponsor because you're hopeless, because you can't imagine a life without the food. And that's right where the disease wants you. This disease wants you and I dead, but it will settle for us to be unhappy, crying, lonely. What does an abuser do when you're in an abusive relationship? What is the first thing that an abuser does in an abusive relationship? They cut you off from your support system. They tell you how much they don't like your friends. They tell you how much they don't like your family. They tell you how much they don't like your coworkers. They tell you how much they don't like anybody, that they just want it to be you and them. They're cutting you off from your support system. And the disease of compulsive overeating will amputate you, cut you off from friends and family and your support system. It will shame you into an isolated, agoraphobic existence so that there is nobody around. You've pushed them away, and there's nobody to pull you out of circling the drain as you die. That's how the disease kills. The first thing the disease does is it cuts you off from your support system. It makes you live an isolated, lonely life. And you've pushed everybody away so effectively that there's no one there to help. And you don't believe they could or would help anyway. This disease is permanent, progressive, and fatal. The only remedy is a spiritual awakening as the result of the steps. Let's continue. The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms, for mine endured this agony 2 more years. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Again, I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. Again, he wants to die. He knows he can't live with the liquor and he can't live without the liquor. And that's where I was too. There were flights from city to country and back as my wife and I sought escape. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture were so hellish I feared I would burst through my window sash and all. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor lest I suddenly leap. A doctor came with a heavy sedative. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. Could you imagine how blotto he was? This combination soon landed me on the rocks. People feared for my sanity. So did I. I could eat little or nothing when drinking, and I was 40 pounds underweight. My brother-in-law is a physician. That's Dr. Leonard Strong. Now we're going to start to see God moving his hand into this equation, and things are going to begin to happen which are going to change the world forever. And through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics.
You feel sick?
Somebody is unmuted. Somebody is unmuted. That's going to be the Towns Hospital in New York City. Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. What is the belladonna treatment? Belladonna is a poison. But Dr. Towns found that by cutting the poison with chemicals, it became a very good sedative. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. Best of all, I met a kind doctor, Silkworth, who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill bodily, the allergy, and mentally, the twist of the mind. So in April of 1933, Bill will go into the hospital for the first of 3 hospitalizations. This will be the first time that he will go in, and he will learn of the allergy of the body. He will learn of the twist of the mind, but he has no remedy for it yet. It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. A goose is a symbol of prosperity. He's now sober. He will remain sober from April of 1933 to April of 1934, 1 year. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. But it was not, for the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. After a time, I returned to the hospital. This is hospitalization number 2. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or I would develop a wet brain, perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. Now, Dr. Silkworth is looking at Bill and seeing him for the second time, has concluded, based on his history, based on what he sees, that Bill is an alcoholic. And he's telling Lois, there's nothing I can do for him. Dr. Silkworth understood what alcoholism was. He understood the allergy of the body and the twist of the mind, but he had no remedy for alcoholism. He didn't have anything that he could do about it. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. In other words, he wants to die. It was a devastating blow to my pride. Top of page 8. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities, of my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining the endless procession of sots who had gone on before. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. So here's the guy that came out of World War I, high hopes. He's going to manage vast enterprises with the utmost assurance. Now all he wants to do is lay down and die. Now all he wants to do is lay down and die. He doesn't know what else to do. He's been hospitalized. A doctor has told his wife that he is either going to die, go to the insane asylum, or go to some sort of an institution where he's just going to sit there for the rest of his life and rot until death comes. Doesn't seem like much of a life to Bill Wilson. Doesn't seem like much of a life to anybody. And all he wants to do now is die. Can I relate to Bill Wilson? You bet that I can. Do I think the way Bill thinks? Do I eat the way Bill drinks? Yes. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. What a poetic and beautiful description of step one. I know how to say step one in Italian. I did this kind of retreat for the group in Italy, and the beautiful Barbara was the interpreter, and I listened. And how do you say step one in Italian? Passo prima, step one. See, I'm showing off for you. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital, a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of the first drink, and on Armistice Day, 1934, that's November 11th, 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. Catapulted. Catapult is a beautiful image. It throws you. Whoa, it just throws you into that fourth dimension. There's the dimension of height, width, and depth. And the fourth dimension is the dimension of the spiritual, of God. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. What a beautiful set of promises. What a beautiful image. As horrible as the disease is, that's how sweet and that's how wonderful the recovery is. That's how wonderful it is. This is not a dress rehearsal. If you're struggling, if you're new, grab one of us after the meeting and ask who can sponsor you and start going. If you've been around a while and you've struggled, change something, change your attitude, change your behaviors, change your sponsor, change things. You'll find that there's a whole world out there that you can't even dream of when you're in the food. I'm at the bottom of 8. Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen with a certain satisfaction. I reflected there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through that night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. Now, we're going to give you a little background on what's going to happen. Somebody is definitely unmuted. Somebody somehow is unmuted. Now, let's go to a place called Rhode Island. Rhode Island is in the United States. And while we're in Rhode Island, we're going to look in on a man, and his name is Rowland Hazard. And Rowland Hazard is a wealthy boy, wealthy guy. He is a millionaire beyond comprehension. His family has been in the United States since the late 1600s. They owned a company called Burlington Mills, which today is Burlington Carpeting. And if you've ever walked on carpeting, you've probably walked on Burlington Carpeting. They also had large stock amounts in another company called Allied Chemical, which is still traded on the New York Stock Exchange today. One time, Rowland had himself sequestered on a Caribbean island, and the quartermaster was instructed for the year he was on this island not to bring him any liquor. And for 1 year on this Caribbean island, Rowland was able to stay sober. He gets off the island, he lands in Miami, and within a very short period of time, he's as drunk can be. And he had a lot of money, and he sought out, at that time, psychiatry was in its infancy. We think of psychiatry as always being around. That's not the case. Psychiatry in the 1920s, 1930s was really in its infancy. And he sought out the services of the most preeminent psychiatrist in the world, whose name was Sigmund Freud. And Freud was not taking on any new patients. And he says to Freud, who's the number 2 man in this psychiatry thing? And he says, Dr. Adler. And he seeks out the services of Dr. Adler, and Dr. Adler was not taking on any new patients. And he says, who's the number 3 man in this psychiatrist thing? And he says, well, the number 3 man is Carl Jung, but in order to go to Carl Jung, you're going to have to get yourself to Geneva, Switzerland, because that's where he lives, is in Switzerland. And Roland says, that's not a big problem. I'll go out to Switzerland, no big deal. He takes a ship across the Atlantic, lands in Paris, and from Paris, he makes his way to Geneva, Switzerland. And for 1 year, he is psychoanalyzed by Dr. Jung, Carl Jung, J-U-N-G, Jung, not Jung, not Young, Jung. And he psychoanalyzes Roland, and there's no liquor on the compound. So Roland stays sober for the year that he's with Jung. And at the end of the year, 1932, Carl Jung says to Roland Hazard, I think I've done everything I can do for you, my boy. It's time for you to go home and live your life. And Roland goes to Paris. And while he's in Paris, who does he run into? But 2 very, very wealthy friends of his parents who happen to be there on a vacation, on their holiday. And they say, Roland, my boy, what are you doing here? It's so wonderful to see you. And Roland tells these 2 people about his quest for sobriety and his year with Dr. Jung and all the things that he has done to try and remain sober. Now, none of them knew anything about alcoholism at all whatsoever. None of them knew a thing. And they decide to celebrate at the insistence of the man that was friends with Roland's dad. They absolutely insist on celebrating with a bottle of France's finest champagne. Money was no object. They tell the waiter, bring us a bottle of your best. And within a very short period of time, Roland is unable to stand up. He can't stand, he can't walk, he can't get on the ship, he can't go home. He goes back to Dr. Jung. And Dr. Jung looks at him and he says, you're going to die, you're an alcoholic. I misdiagnosed you. And Roland begs Jung. He begs him, is there no other way? Now, is it odd or is it God? Is it odd or God that Roland got to Jung rather than Freud or Adler? Freud and Adler believed that all solution lie within the mind. All solution lie within the mind. And Roland is hearing from Dr. Jung, yes, Roland, here and there are people who have experienced a vital spiritual experience and they have changed their behaviors, attitudes, and thoughts. So Roland is in search of a spiritual experience, but he doesn't want to necessarily go to a traditional church. He goes back to the United States, enthusiastic about his chances. And what does he do? He seeks out what was also then in its beginnings, the Oxford Group. And he goes to New York and he goes to the Calvary Mission and he meets Sam Shoemaker. And the Oxford Groupers were people who were practicing first century Christianity to the best of their ability. Frank Buckman was their founder, and he was a Lutheran minister from Pennsylvania who got assigned to a church in England near Oxford University. And so these students started to become known as the Oxford Group. And Buckman believed that Christians had lost their enthusiasm for Christ. Enthusiasm, there's a good word. It comes from 2 Greek words, entheos, from God. Entheos, from God. And he wanted to instill Christians with this enthusiasm that they were so sorely lacking in. And he doesn't know how to do it. And early Christians were willing to die for Christ. And he sees that the world in the 20th century is not. But he goes to China on a mission. And he sees Christians who are enthusiastic. They are enthusiastic. And what is the difference between the Christians that he sees in China and the Christians that he sees in England and the United States? That the Christians in China are practicing altruism. What is altruism? We talked about it last night. Giving to others with no thought of return. And he instills this idea of altruism into his Oxford groupers in England. And one of his front men for the United States was Sam Shoemaker. And Sam is the front man. He was an Episcopalian minister. He is the front man for what's going on in New York. And he goes in the cavalry mission. Now, Rowland gets introduced to two other alcoholics who are there for the same reason. One is named Shep Cornell, and one of them is named Seabrook Graves Jr. And Seabrook Graves Jr. and Rowland will become inseparable friends. They are both in the Oxford group, neither one of which knows anything about alcoholism, anything about it, nothing. They just know that they're staying sober by practicing the precepts of the Oxford group. Then, one day in 1934, they decide that they are going to take a trip to Rhode Island and visit Rowland's family. Rowland's family is in Rhode Island. And while Rowland and Seabrook Graves Jr. are visiting the Hazards, we're going to focus our attention to Albany, New York. Leave Rowland and Seabrook Graves Jr. in Rhode Island, and we're going to go to Albany, New York in our mind. And we're going to look in on a man named Edwin Ebby Thatcher. And Edwin Ebby Thatcher was a drunk. His father had been the mayor of Albany, New York. His brother would one day become mayor of Albany, New York. And Edwin Ebby Thatcher, in early 1934, is sent to Manchester, Vermont to get the summer home in shape. And he goes out in March of 1934 to Manchester, Vermont, to get the summer home going. And in April of 1934, he's painting a wall, and some pigeons landed on the gutter. So he does what any normal alcoholic with delusions of grandeur do. He goes inside and he gets his shotgun and he starts blasting the pigeons. Of course, the pigeons are long gone, but he's drunk. And the neighbors call the police. And the police come. And in April of 1934, Ebby Thatcher is arrested for drunk and disorderly. And he is told by the police in Manchester, Vermont, that if there's one more incident of him getting arrested while he's drunk, he's going to Brattleboro. What's Brattleboro? Brattleboro is a city in Vermont, but it is also where the insane asylum is. And the insane asylum is there, and Ebby doesn't want to go there. But he is told he's going to Brattleboro if this happens again. So for May, June, July, and August of 1934, most of August, Ebby remains bone dry. In August of 1934, Ebby is dead drunk. He's driving his car drunk. He's drinking while he's driving. There's open liquor in the car. And in April of 1934, he drives right into a woman's kitchen, knocking down the wall and destroying the car. rather than showing any contrition for what he has done, not showing any contrition for what he has done, he hops out of the car unhurt. And instead of saying to her, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh my God," he says, "Hey, Toots, how about a cup of coffee?" She flips out and calls the police. And in late August of 1934, early September of 1934, Ebby Thatcher is getting readied by the court to be remanded to Brattleboro Insane Asylum for drunk and disorderly behavior. Now, let's let Ebby stay in his cell. Let's focus on Roland and Sebra Graves Jr. Roland Hazard has now taken Sebra to Rhode Island to meet his parents. And Sebra Graves Jr. in early September of 34 says, "I would like you to meet my parents. I live in East Dorset, Vermont." Who else lives in East Dorset, Vermont? Bill. He doesn't live there anymore, but he was born there. Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson. And they go to East Dorset, Vermont. If they went a week later or a week earlier, we're dead. They happen to be there the week that Ebby Thatcher is to be remanded to Brattleboro. And they get wind of this. And they decide that they're going to approach the judge about this. And the judge's name just happens to be Sebra Graves Sr. Is it odd or is it God? And they go to the judge and they ask the judge to remand Ebby to their care in September of 1934, early September. And the judge says, "Yes, I'll bring Ebby to Chambers and have him sign extradition papers." In other words, if Ebby doesn't do what Roland and Sebra tell him to do, he is immediately to be brought back and put in Brattleboro Insane Asylum. Ebby agrees reluctantly. He was not exactly a fireball of enthusiasm about going to the Oxford group to see these holy rollers, as he called them. He wasn't exactly thrilled about this. Ebby goes to New York with Roland and with Sebra. And from September to October, he is sober 1 month. From October to November, he is sober 2 months. With 2 months of sobriety, he is told that it is time for him to give testimony to someone else. And he says, "What does that mean?" And they say, "Go tell somebody else what God did for you." In other words, sponsor. He says, "I don't want to go give testimony." And they say, "If you don't give testimony, you got to go to Brattleboro Insane Asylum." He says, "I think I'll go give some testimony." So he thinks and he thinks and he thinks and he thinks. Who could he give testimony to where he won't embarrass the crap out of himself? And he remembers his old drinking buddy. He remembers his old pal. And his old buddy, Bill Wilson, is there. And his old buddy is drinking in his kitchen on 182 Clinton Street in Brooklyn. And Ebby decides to make the call and visit Bill Wilson. Lois is not thrilled about Ebby's visit. Ebby's visits usually meant wanton drunkenness by the two of them. These were old drinking buddies. Let's go to the bottom of page 8 with everything that I've told you in mind. And Clara or whomever, we may run over on this session. We may run over time on this session. So I'm just warning you now. Okay. Bottom of 8. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. Top of 9. He was sober. Sober is in italics, so he was sober. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wonder how he had escaped. Of course he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. He wants to drink with him. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a JAG. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing an oasis. Drinkers are like that. The door opened and he stood there fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had gotten into the fellow. He wasn't himself. Come, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me, simply but smilingly. He said, I've got religion. I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yeah, the old boy was on fire, all right, but bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. I've sat at that table. It's in Bedford Hills, in Stepping Stones. I've sat there. I've got pictures of myself there. You should visit there too. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how two men, Roland and Zebra, had appeared in court persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. He had come to pass his experience along to me. New thought, if I cared to have it. I was shocked but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. And remember, hopeless also means I'm out of ideas. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays, way over there on the hillside. There was that proffered temperance pledge I never signed. My grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church folk and their doings. His insistence that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. His fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died. These recollections welled up from the past. They made me swallow hard. In other words, Bill was not an atheist, but he didn't like to be told what to do. I know there's no one on this line of the 147 people here that can relate to that. We all love to be told what to do, but Bill didn't like to be told what to do. That wartime day in old Winchester Cathedral came back again. He's thinking about seeing the grave of this guy who drank himself to death. And he's starting to think that even though Ebby is on fire about God and religion, which are turnoffs to Bill, there's something about Ebby that's indisputable. What's indisputable about him? He is sober. He's sober. I had always believed in a power greater than myself. Watch your capitals here. When he capitalizes, he's talking about God. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher. Cipher is nothing, empty, and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe, capitalized, who knew neither time nor limitation, but that was as far as I had gone. With ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there when they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength, and direction. I became irritated and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. Now let's see where he goes from here. He's struggling with this God idea. He's struggling. He's looking. Certainly there's got to be a more complicated solution to this. Now, Bill doesn't know that there's a solution to his alcoholism. And Ebby doesn't know the problem. Somebody is unmuted. And Bill doesn't know the solution, and Ebby doesn't know the problem. Let's see where we go from here. Top of 11. To Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching most excellent. For myself I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. Now this next paragraph is timeless. It is as timeless as the mountains and the oceans. It's as timeless as the streams and the rivers. It's as timeless as life itself. The wars which had been fought, the burnings and chicanery with that religious dispute had facilitated, made me sick. I honestly doubted whether on balance the religions of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me. But my friend sat before me and he made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Can I relate to this? You bet I can. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had in effect been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute, and that was none at all. That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in a human heart which has done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. So no longer was Bill Wilson looking for the splitting of the Red Sea. No longer was Bill Wilson looking for the burning bush. No longer was he looking for those kind of miracles that we look for in the Bible. He was looking at a guy that he knew was drunk. He knew that Ebby was as drunk as he ever was. Ebby and Bill looked at each other, and Bill would say, if I ever get to be as bad a drunk as Ebby, I'm going to quit. And Ebby would say, if I ever get to be as bad a drunk as Bill, I'm going to quit. And in order for the message to be carried, it must have depth and weight. And here was Ebby Thatcher. God knew exactly who to send with the message. He didn't send a preacher. He didn't send a rabbi. He didn't send a stranger. He didn't send somebody that didn't know anything about alcoholism, that didn't see the things you see when you're a compulsive overeater, didn't feel the things we feel when we're eating or not eating. He sent Ebby. And Ebby had credibility with Bill because Bill knew that Ebby was a drunk. And Ebby carried the message to Bill. Let's see where we go from there. I saw very bottom of 11. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. He still doesn't like this simple God-based idea. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. That means a feeling of dislike. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. Now, Ebby is going to learn this next sentence from Sam Shoemaker. And Ebby is going to open the door for Bill Wilson and people like me and you and millions of unborn generations to walk through the door of a 12-step program. And whether they're Jews or Catholics or Protestants, whether they're atheists or agnostics or believers, or they're Muslims or they're Buddhists or whatever it is that they are, or they're whatever it is that they do or don't believe in. Hold on. They can find a seat in a 12-step meeting and be welcomed. What a miracle. My friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? And this doesn't just mean that you can be any religion or lack of religion that you want. It means that I'm free to choose whatever conception of God works for me. And I see people in OA every day that keep struggling and struggling and struggling. And one of the things that they struggle with is step 2. If you're around me enough, you'll know that 2 and 10 are the most underutilized steps. And 3 and 4 are the most misunderstood. Came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Came to believe means it's going to be a lifelong process, but I have to divorce myself from a God that doesn't work for me. I have to divorce myself from any God that is standing in the way between me and my recovery. If you have a God in your head that you really don't believe in, fire that God and hire a new one. I know it sounds crazy, but how do you do it? You do it by doing it. It's not a hard process. Describe what you want, and that's your God. It's that simple. It's that simple. And you have to work at your relationship with God every single day, just like you work at your relationship with everybody in your life. Nobody is saying you have to believe that there's a God. You just have to be willing to believe that there's a power greater than yourself. Nobody says you have to believe it. You have to be willing to believe it. That's all that's required. Let's continue. That statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. This is where the solution meets the problem. Now Bill is on board. He is willing to believe that there is a power greater than him. This is the emanation point of the 12-step life. This is where we're starting from. Now the confluence. The confluence is when 2 rivers come together. Now the confluence is here. Bill knew the problem. He didn't know the solution. Ebby knew that there was a solution. He didn't know the problem. And now the problem and the solution have come together. God chose very unlikely people, but he chose who he chose. He's God, I'm not. Let's continue. Thus was I convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. At long last I saw. What did he see? He saw recovery. I felt. What did he feel? Hope. For the first time in his life, he was hopeful. I believed. What did he believe? He believed that there was a God and that it was a power greater than him that would solve his problem. I saw recovery. I felt hope. I believed in that power which is greater than myself. This is huge. I saw recovery. I felt hope. I believed that God could and would if he were sought. The world is now a different place, and it will never be the same. Now there's hope. Now there's recovery. Now we have something that will work. A new world, scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. But soon the sense of his presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within myself, and so it had been ever since, how blind I had been. Now, Bill is still drinking, and he's going to the Oxford group meetings with Ebby. But on December 11th, he will go into the hospital drunk, and he will see Silkworth. And he will wave a bottle of gin, and he will say, "Doctor, I have found something that's a solution." And Dr. Silkworth assumes he's referring to the bottle of gin. And he says, "My boy, go upstairs and take your clothes off and get into bed. And I'll be up there as soon as I can." Now, with 2 days of sobriety, Bill will be sober on the 12th of December, 1934, and the 13th. With 2 days of sobriety, Bill will begin to work what we know today are the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous with God and with Ebby. Let's see where he goes from there. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol. This is again evidence you cannot remain eating. You can't keep eating and work the steps. It does not work that way. You have to be sober. For the last time, treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. There I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away root and branch. I have not had a drink since. These are what we know today as the first 4 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Excuse me, the first 4 steps and 6 and 7. So it says here, I ruthlessly faced my sins, that's step 4, and became willing to have my newfound friend, notice friend is capitalized, he's talking about God, take them away root and branch, 6 and 7. I have not had a drink since. So he's worked 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7. My schoolmate visited me, that's Ebby, in the hospital, and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies, step 5. We made a list of people I had hurt, step 8, or toward whom I felt resentment, step 8. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong, step 9. Never was I to be critical of them, step 10. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability. He has now worked what we know today. He's got to go out and make the amends, but he's willing to. He has worked the first 10 steps of what we know today as Alcoholics Anonymous. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Step 11 is this paragraph. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. Step 11. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. Belief in the power of God plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility, top of 14, to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Simple but not easy, a price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. Not most things, all things. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. Bill always said that on December 15th, 1934, in his room, the day after he took the first 11 steps, that God came to him and he had a spiritual experience. This is a description of it. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. For a moment I was alarmed and called my friend the doctor, Silkworth, to ask if I were still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, "Something has happened to you I don't understand, but you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were." The good doctor now sees many men who've had such experiences. He knows they are real. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics. This is step 12. That thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. Now this is step 12, and Bill was a selfish son of a bitch. He was a selfish son of a bitch. And here he is in the hospital with Ebby. And what is he doing? He's thinking about how he can bring this message to the still suffering person. That's what he's thinking about here. Now that paragraph plus the next paragraph are vital. Remember last night I got a question from somebody and said about sponsorship. This answers it absolutely right down the line. Yes, I can do other service in OA. I can be a secretary. It's no substitute for sponsorship. I must sponsor. There's nothing to be afraid of. If they want to recover, you can't hurt them. If they don't want to recover, you can't help them. But this next paragraph answers the question. My friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. There's your instruction. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again. If he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. That answers the question. I must continue to perfect and enlarge my spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. And if I do not do that, I am certain to eat again. It is not a possible, it's for sure I'm going to eat again. Remember that I have a progressive disease. And I have a progressive recovery. My recovery dictates that I must continue doing more and different, more and different. Complacency is something that the disease loves. It just loves complacency. You have to keep doing more. I'm sorry to bring you that news, but you have a progressive disease. And if you don't keep doing more, if you don't keep doing different, you're going to run into a big, big problem that just might kill you. Hold on one second. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. Remember that this is a textbook. It's telling you what to do. Many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for living that works in rough going. We commenced to make many fast friends. Remember, he became a lone wolf? Well, look what's happening to him now. As the disease is progressive, the recovery is progressive too. And a fellowship has grown up among us of which it is a wonderful thing to feel a part. The joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty. I have seen hundreds of families set their feet in the path that really goes somewhere, have seen the most impossible domestic situations righted, feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in the lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. In one western city, Akron, Ohio, and its environs, there are 1,000 of us and our families. We meet frequently so that newcomers may find the fellowship they seek. At these informal gatherings, one may often see from 50 to 200 persons. We are growing in numbers and power. An alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. Our struggles with them are variously strenuous, comic, and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. He could not or would not see our way of life. There is, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose some would be shocked at our seeming worldliness and levity, but just underneath there is deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. Most of us feel we need look no further for utopia. We have it with us right here and now. Each day, my friend's simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. Bill Wilson died January 24th, 1971. I hope sincerely that you have cast some new light on Bill's story, and I hope that it will mean more to you than it has in the past, or that it reinforced some ideas. If you've heard me before, you've heard others bring it to life before. Bill's story is an amazing, amazing story of identification. We see in the first 8 pages the progression of the disease. And we see in the last 8 pages, it's divided into 2 sections, the beauty of the recovery. This is the most magnificent, most fantastic way of life imaginable. Take our hands if you're struggling. Take our hand if you're new. And let us help you. Let us help you. This is a very simple program. It's very, very simple. And if you're overcomplicating it, we can break it down for you so that it's very simple. We are here to help you. Okay, I'm exhausted. I got to admit that. But we have 24 minutes left until 9:30, which is 11:30 Central Time. It's 11:07 in La Crosse, Wisconsin. So we're going to go into Q&A, and for 24 minutes, 23 minutes, we will take the questions. Thanks.
Yeah, please write your questions. If you have questions in Spanish, you can write it down in the chat. And if you have questions in English, you can raise your hand. So go ahead. Okay, Hope, go ahead.
Hello, Harlan. Thank you so much for your service, and I'm so tickled to get to see you and hear you live and in person. It's wonderful. I have a question. I've not started sponsoring yet. I've been in programs since September of 2020. I've worked the steps. I stopped at step 9. Which that's another story I won't get into. For brevity's sake, I just want to know, what do you think the requirements are to start sponsoring?
It's in the big book. It says, having had a spiritual awakening. And what I would do if I was in your shoes, I would get a sponsor, a new one, not the one you've had. I would get a sponsor and go back and do everything over again. And then when you get up to step 12, start sponsoring. The instructions for the qualification is very clear. It says, having had a spiritual awakening. And if you've had a spiritual awakening, you should be sponsoring. If you haven't, you should not be. But I would start over from Jump Street. And I would get a new sponsor.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Lois.
Hi, I'm Louise from Compulsive Overeater. Just wanted to, not really a question, but just wanted to thank you so much for your service today. And I love the detail and the information. It's fabulous. I'm just going to say that I've been in OA 43 years, been sober 43 years in AA, but OA has been a lot tougher for me.
Oh, sure.
And I'm starting over. I'm a newcomer every day. Somebody told me I get up in the morning, I'm an addict, go to bed, I'm recovered. Anyway, I just want to thank you, Harlan, for your service, and I hope I can hear some more of how the program works. Thank you.
Come back this afternoon. We'll crack open steps 3 and 4.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Harlan, is it okay to jump in with a question?
Sure.
Go ahead.
As long as it's okay with, as long as it's okay with.
I'm Lupita.
Lupita, thank you.
Yes, that's okay. I'm waiting for another question that they're gonna have in Spanish, but that's okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
When is the afternoon session? I don't have that.
Oh, let me tell you in 1 second here. I've got it on my. Hold on. The afternoon session is 1 o'clock Central Time. That's La Crosse, Wisconsin time. So that's 11 o'clock my time.
So 2 o'clock Eastern.
2 o'clock
Yes.
Eastern, correct.
Yeah. Now, what about tomorrow? Is there an afternoon session tomorrow?
No, there will not be an afternoon session tomorrow. We're going to go from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. La Crosse, Wisconsin time, which is Central time. And so it'll be 7 to 9 my time. And it'll be 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. So for you, it'll be 10 a.m. to noon.
Okay. So 1 p.m. today.
1 p.m. Central time is 2 p.m. your time.
2 p.m. Eastern. Okay.
2 p.m.
Okay.
Eastern time. Yep.
There, I wrote it down now. Yes, and I just wanted to comment that this is a wonderful, wonderful session. Thank you so much, Harlan, for your service.
Very welcome. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Okay, Elida, go ahead. Ask your question.
Unmute. Hi. Hey, Harlan. Thank you so much for being here with us. You're famous now in English and Spanish, and maybe we can do this in Yiddish at some time. But my question is, you talk about spiritual experience and spiritual awakening. What is your experience to this spiritual experience or spiritual awakening? How did you know that you had an spiritual awakening?
How do I know that I've had a spiritual awakening? Because the desire to use food has left me. And when we get to step 10 on page 84, the bottom of 84 and most of all of 85, it'll describe what the spiritual awakening feels like. You will recoil as if from a hot flame. You won't be you'll be seldom interested in food. I like my meals. I like my food. I enjoy certain things more than I enjoy other things, but I don't sit and obsess about food as long as I keep working my steps. But there's no cure for this. You have to keep doing it and keep doing it, because if you stop, you're back in the disease again. You have to keep working at it. You need a good sponsor. You need to keep working at it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Lupita, there is a question in the chat. Okay, as a co-moderator, I'm going to read the question in English. What do you think about when somebody being sponsored said that her sponsor had left her because she's not following her food plan? What do you think about sponsoring dropping people because they don't follow their food plan?
Well, you read page 96, you're supposed to drop them if they keep going back into the food. You're not helping them if you hang on to them. If they keep going back into, I'll go with somebody once, maybe twice. But once they've picked up food, I tell them, you need to hear a different voice. I'm not helping you. There's a whole world of sponsors out there. You need to hear a different voice. You're not helping them.
Okay, here's a question in Spanish in the chat.
Okay.
Moni is going to translate it. Quisiera saber si conoces recuperados que les ha costado su conexión original espiritual.
Somebody needs to translate that.
Y ya no la, y no la,
he cannot listen.
no la puedo ya leer.
I can read it if you want me to. I would like to know if you know or you have known people who have recovered spiritual. They have had trouble getting a spiritual recovery, but they have they have I guess they mean that they have been able to get recovered physically or with food recovery. If you're
overeating, you're not going to have a spiritual awakening. If you're drunk, you're not going to have a spiritual awakening. That means you're depending on the food. You're not depending on God.
So I guess the question is, can you get recovery from food addiction without having a spiritual connection?
No. You're just dieting at that point if you have no spiritual connection. You need to change your perception of God, and you probably need to change sponsors. You may have a perception of God that's adversarial to you. You may have a perception of God that's just not working for you. But no, I've never seen anybody get recovery without a relationship with their higher power. No, not in 42 years. I have never seen it. No.
Yes, I think that Charles is saying that in the chat also says there is no such a thing as just physical recovery alone.
Correct.
So Charles is agreeing with you.
Correct. Correct. I would agree. Is that it? Who else?
Ok. ¿Qué opinas cuando una persona que tiene tiempo en el programa dice que no hace servicio porque ya hizo bastante servicio?
What now?
He's right there. Can you read it? Okay, what is your opinion of someone who says they don't want to give any service in the program because they already have given a lot of service in their life?
They're probably not going to recover. They sound like self-will run riot. They're probably not going to recover. This is a life of service. I could be doing other things right now too. So could the people that made this possible. Clara made this possible. Lapita made this possible. There are co-hosts and interpreters that made this possible. If you don't want to give service, that sounds to me like self-will run riot, and that's not a recipe for recovery, in my opinion. There's knowing when to step up and when to step back as an elder statesman, but you have to be sponsoring, you have to give service. So the answer to your question is no, that is not a recipe for recovery. No. That doesn't mean you have to sponsor every person that asks you, but you have to do service.
Hope, go ahead with your question. Open up your mic and ask your question.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to know why you recommend working the 12 steps quickly, and are there any exceptions? Thank you.
I don't think there's any exceptions that I've seen. The reason I recommend that working the steps quickly is because the quicker you work them and get to the spiritual awakening, the less time you have to hold your head underwater. In other words, you don't have to diet with group support. I would rather have the spiritual awakening and get into a position where I'm not using willpower to stop eating, to not eat. That's why I recommend it quickly. There's no instances in the big book of a description of someone working the steps slowly. There's not one instance of them working it slowly. And a lot of times people want to make this into something that it's not. They want to make it into this big college course and they have to understand everything. And no, that's not what the big book tells you. The big book doesn't say that you have to spend weeks and weeks on a step. It doesn't say that. We just read in Bill's story. Did Bill work the steps quickly or did he work them slowly? He worked them quickly. We're going to read about Bill Dotson. We won't, but in A Vision for You, the chapter of Vision for You, Bill Dotson, he works them very quickly, very quickly. Dr. Bob, he didn't work them quickly. He wouldn't do number 9. And what happened to him? He went back out into the liquor. Once he got back and said, crap, I'm going to go make amends. That was June the 10th, 1935. By June the 26th, 16 days later, he was calling on Bill Dotson with Bill Wilson. 16 days after he got sober, he was making a 12-step call, and it wasn't his first one. So there's no advantage to working the steps slowly. A further understanding of these things does not bring about recovery. It's the working of these things. And then once you work them and you have that spiritual awakening and you're food neutral and you're helping others, then the understanding starts to come. So I would again say, no, there's no advantage to working them slowly. And no, I don't believe working them slowly is better. I just don't.
Okay, another question in the chat says, can the composite eater recuperate in another fellowship or only in OA?
I wouldn't know. But what I would say to you is, why would you want to recover in another fellowship when you have Overeaters Anonymous? So that to me sounds a little crazy. That to me sounds like self-will run riot. Now, I will tell you this. When I lived in Eugene, Oregon, there is no OA there. There may be now, I don't know. I haven't lived there for 19 years. I had to go to AA, but I touched base with people that had a food addiction all the time. So sometimes you have to get out of your own way. And the world is such today that you can't tell me that you can't zoom in or phone into an OA meeting. I have to be where people speak my language. So I would recommend to that person to knock it off and get into OA. And if you have other things like Al-Anon or AA or whatever it is you need to do, do them. But I think that at some point you have to come into OA or you're going to be in trouble. That's my opinion.
Okay, and another question says, Chuck C. didn't believe in sponsorship. What is your view? Chuck C.
Chuck C. didn't believe in sponsorship? He was,
yeah, that's what he says here.
I don't believe that's true. I absolutely do not believe that Chuck C. didn't believe in sponsorship. You'd have to show me or prove to me that that's what he said, because Chuck C. was Clancy Imislin's sponsor for a long time. Okay. And Chuck C. sponsored other people, and Chuck C. had a sponsor. So I don't believe that's true. I just don't. I'm sorry.
Okay. A Vision for You, Chapter 11, an overview of the program in the early days of AA. The steps are worked quickly and continuously. That's just like a comment.
Okay.
Could I work the steps with different sponsors? That's another question.
Sure, if you want to. There's nothing in the book that says you have to have the same sponsor. I don't really know. I mean, I don't know how to answer that. I don't have any of the particulars, but sure.
Which are the characteristics of a good sponsor?
someone who's informed, someone who knows the big book, who doesn't distract me with other things. And my definition of a good sponsor is someone who they themselves are living the program. And a good sponsor doesn't look for results. If I want to go out and eat donuts today, that's not a reflection on my sponsor. A good sponsor just knows, here's the program, here's what I did. Whatever you do is up to you. You want to go out and eat donuts, go out and eat donuts. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm not going to go stand there and knock the donut out of your hand. Go ahead. Go ahead. But a good sponsor works the program themselves, and a good sponsor shares with you their hope, strength, and experience and points you to the big book. If they start pointing me toward other things, I don't think that's so good.
Okay, another one says, I'm in 3 fellowships and work them separately. Do you agree?
I'm not in 3 fellowships, so I don't have that experience of knowing what it's like to be multiply addicted. I would say it sounds good. I mean, it sounds okay. I mean, I don't know. I don't have that experience, Lupita, or whoever's asking the question.
Okay.
I'm not in 3 fellowships, so I don't really know. I'm not. But if you need 3 or you need 5, do what you need to do. It's your life. It's your life.
Okay. Yeah, the next question says, is it enough to speak with my sponsor once a week?
I think not. I speak to mine every day. My sponsees call me every day. I don't think once a week is adequate. In my opinion, no, because life is life and things are going to happen every day. And I have to do 10 steps throughout the day. I do multiple 10 steps throughout the day because things get squirrely. Now, that doesn't mean I call my sponsor with every 10 step. I don't. But I need a God squad, and I need to lower my ego enough to call that sponsor every single day. That's what I need to do.
Okay, another one says, have you ever seen anyone reach spiritual awakening before completing the steps, yet still working through them?
I don't think I've ever seen anybody have a spiritual awakening until they were pretty much at least halfway done with 9. And by the time you're halfway done with 9, you're working 10 and 11. I mean, you don't wait on 10 and 11 and then 12. So it happens at different times for different people. For me, it happened really in step 9. And I was already doing obviously 9, 10, and 11. And then I started sponsoring. But yeah, I don't know. It happens different times for different people. I don't know.
Okay, I think we have to, I'm gonna just ask you the last 2 questions, okay, because the time is running out.
Okay.
Okay, why do I relapse when I feel?
The reason you relapse, the reason anybody relapses, they don't do the steps. They're keeping things inside. They're not doing step 10s. They're keeping fear and anger inside of them. They're not coming forward. They're not working the steps, or they are consuming allergic ingredients or allergic foods, and they're still in the food. And that's why people relapse. The 2 most underutilized steps are 2 and 10. We got to keep an eye on 1. And the 2 most misunderstood are 3 and 4. But that's where relapse is born. If you really work these steps and you work them with a sponsor, you'll never relapse again. Never.
Okay, the last one is just like a comment.
Okay.
I do at least step 5 to 6, step 10 every day on the basics, so that's step 12.
They do 5 or 6 step 10s, or they do 5, 6, and 10?
They do, I do at least 5 to 6 step 10s.
Oh, me too, because things happen, and you have to know that these emotions are going to build up. Look, let's face a fact. The world is full of people, and the world is full of events and headlines and situations that are not according to my script. And I am so given to keeping everything inside me that if I don't do these step 10s, I'm going to eat again, because my brain is going to look for relief from that untenable pain. So whoever said that they do 5 or 6 step 10s a day, I guarantee you they're not going to relapse. I mean, I don't know what else they're doing. I have no idea who asked it. Or you do 5 or 6 step 10s a day because things are scaring you or things are making you mad. You're doing 4 through 12, 5 or 6 times a day. I challenge anybody to do 5 or 6 step 10s and eat chocolate cake. You can't do it. I wouldn't be able to shove the cake in your mouth with a plunger because that person, whoever put that in there, that person sounds to me like they're in fit spiritual condition because the muscles that they need to exercise for spiritual condition are getting worked out all the time. That's what it takes. That's what it takes. And so that's great. That's fantastic. Good for that person. They're smart. They're smart. All right. It's
okay, now
11:30 in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Yeah,
we're gonna Black and Bad Axe rivers come together to form God's country. So let's take a break, and I will see you guys back here at 11 a.m. my time if I haven't fallen asleep. And we'll come back in an hour and a half.
Okay, and please, people who are coming for the first time, stay in the room. Like the people who speak English, stay in the room. And for the Spanish-speaking people, they're gonna be moved to another room. And we're gonna be back in an hour and a half. Thank you very much for being there.